this section we're going to deal with what is known as controlling execution. So this is adding extra layers whereby you are checking, for example, if a particular condition is met, and then according to the condition you execute different commands. Now, one of the most commonly used such constructs, as they're called, is the if, else and end if command, or if and else. So once again, I need you to open the file called CodePlay, same as for the first section. So this is SMM198 topic 10 CodePlay. You can download it from Moodle, and make sure that you open the VBE and put the VBE window right next to the main spreadsheet window. Now go to the subroutine called check cell. So you need to scroll down a little bit. In the previous section I believe we finished with the show sum subroutine, so one below that is the check cell. So let's have a look first of all to see what it does. So as you see, this is the very first command we type in. It's if. It is checking the active cell and a property of the active cell, which is the value. So what is the check? If the value is less than 0, so if it's a negative number effectively. So then it puts the word then in it, so you notice if then, that's the construction, right? Active cell, font and color, so it goes back to the active cell, and this time it chooses the property of font, and under font the property color, and then it sets that to red. Else, so you need to tell it what else to do. If, for example, that command is not, that condition is not met, so otherwise you set the color, the font color of the active cell into green, and finally you end the if. So you choose one or another condition, and that's it. So this operates on whichever is the active cell. So we're going to go back to the spreadsheet. We go to cell C4 and we put a number which is equal to 56. Make sure to stay on the same cell, otherwise you won't be able to see the result. Go back to your VBE and simply run the macro, it's a subroutine really, either by pressing the run button or the shortcut, the keyboard shortcut, which is F5. So you see now our number has been painted green. Now if I go to another cell, and let's say I put the number minus 78, once again make sure you stay on the current sheet, on the current cell rather, then go back to your editor and run this sub again, and you see now it paints it red. Okay, so it just checks for two conditions, does one thing if the condition is met, does another thing if the condition is not met. We're going to have a look at a different construct called case construct a little bit later on, and this is more appropriate to use when you have a number of conditions that need to be checked and possibly different actions that need to be taken. But among the most basic ones, and on many occasions that will be sufficient, is the if, then, else. Now the next one is another construct which is particularly good for executing loops, right? So this is the most common construct, which is for, and then you say how many number of iterations you need to run something for, and then you go next and you repeat and you repeat and you repeat until you reach the end of the number of iterations. So for this one, go to the next subroutine called sum squared. Now for this subroutine you don't actually need the spreadsheet at all. Everything is done internally and the result is coming out on a message box. So let's have a look to see how it's constructed. First of all, we start by setting an internal variable which we call total. We set it to 0, and then we say for number, so this is number of iterations from 1 to 10, so this is how many times we repeat that. We take the total and we say that the total equals whatever was the previous value of the variable total, and we add to that whatever is this number here, number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., and we square it. So effectively what we get is 1 square plus 2 square plus 3 square plus 10 square at the end. You need to repeat that for the next number, so it starts with 4 from this number to that number, for number equals 1, 2, 10. So remember the 4 and the 2, which are highlighted in blue, these are important. Then in the second line you type whatever is needed to be done, and then you have the next number. So the counter is set from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 10. And when it finishes that loop, so outside the loop now, you ask Excel to open up a message box, and in the message box it will simply display whatever is the end value of the variable total. Okay, so it will not display text called total. If you want to display text as well, then you need to type the text and close into quotes, etc., etc. But we only need this to give us a number in return. So as I said, nothing to put in the spreadsheet. With your cursor somewhere in the sub, run it, and the result you get is that 385. So this is 1 square plus 2 square plus 3 square plus 10 square. If you add them all together, the result is 385. Okay, so very quickly you could change the counter from 1 to 100, run it again, the result is that much. So we go to a slightly different construct now. Actually it's the same construct but with slightly different setup. So this time have a look at the next sub called sum squared 2. Now this time the total is whatever number you set in range A1, in cell A1. So this one reads whatever variable we put in range A1. So if we put nothing, it will start with 0. If we put a number, it will start with that number. And then in range A2, in cell A2, we were going to insert a number which Excel will read and will assign this number to the variable iter, or iter for iterations. So how many numbers to repeat that, we actually set it not in the code but on the spreadsheet. And then it says for a new variable num, the number variable, from 1 to up to the number of iterations, it does the same thing, it executes the same loop. It says the variable total equals to the previous value it had plus the number square, so whatever is this one, 1, 2, 3, 25, whatever it is. Next number. And then when it finishes the calculation, rather than showing it to us as a message box, it actually puts it in cell A5. So if I go now quickly over this side, and what I would like to do is clear everything here so we have something free. So we start here from number, let's start with number 0. We set it to 0. In range A, do the number of iterations, which is 10. And now what we need to do is go back here in our VB editor and execute that. So the result should be familiar, because that's exactly the result of the previous subroutine. Now let's go back and set this to 10 and set this to, I don't know, 250 iterations. Go back here, run the sub, and that's the result we get. Right? And so on and so forth. So this is effectively the same command, the same instruction, but with this time using inputs from cells on the spreadsheet. We get Excel to execute the loop for how many times we instructed to do it, and then it returns a number. So this is the way you would set up this subroutine if you wanted an external user to simply run the macro. So you would highlight for them the cells, you would say insert here starting number, insert here number of iterations, and then press the button to execute. Okay, but at the heart of it, when you construct the code, you don't need to do all that stuff for an external user, because basically you know where the code is, you go and run it yourself pressing F5, and that's it. But if you start packaging all your macros for an outside user, then you may need to do additional work to make it more user-friendly. Now, the next subroutine, which you find here, it's something a little bit more complicated. Let me talk you through it, but before that I'll go back and delete. The numbers have been inserted here. Now, this subroutine is called list formulas. Okay, and it starts, you remember the declaration of variables with the dim command. So I start, this particular sub starts by declaring a number of variables. The first variable is called input range, and this is a range basically. The second one is called output sheet, and this is declared as a worksheet, which eventually is going to be a new worksheet. Then we have something called output row, which is declared as a long number, so it's a number of rows. And finally cell, which is declared as a range. So all of these are variables. Now the next thing is to create a range object. Actually ignore the instruction here. Let's have a look at the actual command. So here it says set the input range, right? So what it is, we know it's a range, but what is it exactly? So the input range is nothing more than a worksheet which already exists. Is the worksheet with the name, so this is worksheets, the name in brackets, and then within the brackets in double quotes, list formulas. And you need to make sure that a worksheet with that name does exist. Now if you look on the right hand side at the bottom, there is a spreadsheet there which is called list formulas, and if you click on it, it is another sheet that basically has a number of various numbers in a matrix. Okay, and behind this is just numbers, individual numbers, almost random. There is one formula here. Underneath there is a table which, as you see, has random numbers between 1 and 1000, which then it tots up, and then there's another summation of all the numbers together, and this is a table basically. So all there is here is just a number of random bits and pieces on a spreadsheet. Some of them are just numbers, others are formulas. And what we're going to do, what this macro or this subroutine is going to do, is to read all these cells, extract the formulas which are used, and then put them in another sheet. So that's all it does, which may sound a bit mundane, but it is just a demonstration of what you can do with a loop basically. Actually, this is a combination of a for next as well as an if statement. Okay, so the next step, we have our spreadsheet called list formulas. So the input range, which remember is a variable, what is it? Well, we give it the value that it is the used range. Okay, used range means basically we ask Excel to scan and find out all the range which has some content in it, whether it is a number or a bit of text or another formula, anything which is not an empty cell. So it will start from cell A1 and it will expand to the right and down at least until it finds the very last cell that has some input. So in our case, it would be to the right hand side, it would be G, and below it would be row 24. So think for a minute, if you had to highlight all the used range, that would be the range. So it would be from A1 to G24. That's all it is, that's all it does. If you were to type in to have a different spreadsheet with a different range that was used, then this command used range would scan it automatically. You wouldn't have to go and specify it. So set the input range equal to the used range in the worksheet list formulas. Then we need to add a new sheet, and this is done with the command worksheets. Actually, this can start with something called this workbook dot worksheets, but I abbreviate it. So I say worksheets, add, and normally if you don't put anything after that, it's going to be fine. The only difference is that the new sheet is going to be added before the sheet which is called list formulas. And if you like that, it's fine, because I didn't particularly like that. I wanted it to be inserted afterwards, to be added after the list formulas worksheet. So there's a little extra command here, if you like, or variable, if you want to call it that. It's called after, and then colon equals active sheet. Because the active sheet is going to be the list formula sheet, I want to put a new sheet after this sheet. And then straight away I want to give it a name. So I say equals, and this is the new name I want to give it. Now, as I said, at the most basic level, right, you would type, actually I'm going to comment it out, you will simply type worksheets dot add, and that's it, right? So that's it. All the others are extras, and it will simply add a worksheet before the one called list formulas, and will give it a generic name like sheet 5 or sheet 6 or whatever is the order. Okay, so I'm leaving this. Actually, I will delete that because we don't want us to confuse the code. And then the next command is set output sheet. Remember, output sheet up here is a variable. Now we give it a value. So our output sheet is going to be the worksheet list formulas output. And why do we say that? Because we will have already named or created that sheet, extra sheet, and name it list formulas output. Now we have the variable for the output row. So the output row is going to be 1. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to go to every individual cell of this range, all of this, the used range, so to speak, and scan it and see if it has a formula in it. So we say now for each cell in the input range, and remember the input range is defined up here, the used range. If cell, which is each individual cell, dot has formula, a statement next to it, which is a command basically asking Excel to check whether the cell has a formula, then. So in here we have an if then. So we start with a for loop, but rather than specifying the for loop to run a set number of times, because we don't know the number of times, we have a different construct where we say if cell has formula, then, or rather we start with for each cell, so it's each individual cell in that input range. And then this is where we have our condition checking. If the cell has a formula, then in the output sheet, right, in the cell where we have output row and first column, all right, we start by putting in an apostrophe. And what is an apostrophe? An apostrophe is a quick way of making any input in a particular cell into a text. So if you were to type a formula, right, in a cell, you would just type equals and the formula, and then it would not show you the formula, it would just do the calculation. But if you want to actually see the formula, other than changing the formatting of the cell, the other way is to put a little apostrophe in front of the formula. So if you put apostrophe equals something, it will just display the formula. So you would say apostrophe cell address, okay? And then the second thing you do, output sheet cells, output row, so the same row, which is going to be set to row 1, and then it will continue from there, comma 2. 2 is the second column. So first row, first column. Put the cell address. First row, second column. Put whatever is the formula included in that cell. Once again by preceding it with an apostrophe, so we can actually see the formula as a bit of text. And then that's the loop. Then set the output row, the new value for output row, for the variable output row, at whatever is the previous value plus 1. Why did we do this? Because we don't have a number of iterations that is known. So we cannot say simply go to the next one, right? To the next number, for example. Do it 10 times and go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Because what we do is we check each cell in the particular input range. So we need to move the counter to the next level. So if we start with output row and the value is 1, the first row, then this value 1 becomes value 2. So the next time this thing repeats, the output row is going to be to the second row, first column, second row, second column. The counter resets to 3 and it becomes third row, first column, third row, second column, and so on and so forth. So this is the end of the if check, of the condition checking. So this closes, this is the if loop, if you like, and then we need to close the for loop. So the for each cell finishes with next cell. Okay, and it will keep doing that until it finds the very last cell in the range, in that input range. And we know in our example it is cell G24. Okay, and then the whole sub finishes. So if I go anywhere now in my sub and run it, what do we get? First of all, we get a new sheet here called list formulas output. So list formulas is that sheet, and list formulas output is the name we specified. Okay, here actually this is exactly where we specify the name. And then what has it done? It has started right from wherever we stopped. So we stopped perhaps somewhere in the output cell. So it started in G2 and it picked up that formula. Okay, so if we go back to the list of formulas, yeah, it started in G2. It went to A8, B8, C8, etc. So you will notice that these are not listed because what they are, they're just numbers. The very first cell where it encounters a formula is here, B9/2. Why does it do that? Remember, down here, if cell has formula. So it is a specific request, not if the cell has something in it, but if specifically it has a formula. Then pick that formula, precede it with an apostrophe, put in the cell address, and then next to it put in the cell formula. So if you see that in the very first cell that it picks up is G2, what will you see? That there is an apostrophe right at the beginning. There's an apostrophe here. Okay, actually it's better if like that. Okay, so you see the apostrophe here. If you go there to the formula, you see the apostrophe here. And that's the reason why you can actually see the formula displayed here. Because if I remove the apostrophe, the formula will just be hidden in the background. So it does the same thing. It goes through every single cell. Now the very last cell where we have a formula should be this one here, the sum table 1, which is cell A24. So if we go down the list, there we are. The very last cell that has a formula is A24, and that's the formula it has. Okay, so again, this is perhaps a tedious example, right? Do you really want to list all the formulas in the spreadsheet? Perhaps not, but it gives you straight away declaring variables, setting values to these variables to start with, then a for loop inside which there is an if check as well, an if loop as well. And I think it is quite useful. The next construct we're going to look at is something called with. And this is a good way of avoiding repetition of the same bits of code again and again. So you start with something and then you apply a number of different, in our case, formatting features on effectively the same cell or range of cells. But before that, Let's go and type a little bit of text in any cell on the spreadsheet. So let's say this is a bit of long text, and then accept this in lieu of pressing enter. Okay, so this is where our text is, and I'm going to put the cursor on it so it becomes the active cell. And then go back to your code and look at the subroutine align cells. So this one does what? Selection, so whatever is the active cell, or for that matter whatever is the active range, and then it sets the property horizontal alignment to center, then selection vertical alignment to also center, so horizontally and vertically center. Then it sets the wrap text feature off, so it says it's false, and the orientation to horizontal. And finally it just stretches the column to auto fit them to the amount of text. So what you would do here is to apply this, to run this routine, I will simply select play. So what it has done, it centered the text and then stretched the column to fit the text. But let's say we want to do this in a slightly different way. So if you have a look at the second subroutine with align cells 2, this time we say with, and we've taken this bit selection, and this bit could be something much longer where you specify a particular range, but let's say we do it just for one cell, the active cell. So with the selection, and let's go and say this is another bit of even longer text, and accept it. So what does this do? With the selection, change the horizontal and vertical alignments to center once again, allow the text to be wrapped, so it's true. So I've for the time being commented out this orientation of the text, so we're going to change it in a minute, and then I say the orientation is actually vertical. Okay, and you will see what I mean in a minute. And then in that case I've commented out the auto fit of columns, but I activated the auto fit of rows. So if I go and run this sub now, this is the result I get. So my text is centered vertically and horizontally, wrap text is activated, and I'm asking the text to be orientated vertically. That's why you say it like that. And then in order to be able to read it properly, I have asked the rows to auto fit. So if I want to change that a little bit, I will comment out the rows and comment in the columns. I will comment in the vertical orientation, and I will comment out the horizontal orientation. So comment in the horizontal orientation. And if I, with the same selection, run this up now, this is what you get. So what you still get is the wrap text. Okay, so the wrap text means that the text is included inside the cell rather than overflowing to the next cell. Perhaps we can try to set this to false and run the sub again, and this is what you get, which is very similar to what you see up here. Okay, so this case you don't have to repeat the cell address or the range that you are selecting. You can simply state the selection once, and then you just do everything else you need to do. So this is the with and with construct. The next construct is that of case. Now case is quite interesting because it's like an extension of the if statement. So the case means that you can check a number of different conditions and then take action according to the condition which is met or is not met. So let me first of all get rid of everything I have here, just clear all, and I'm going to make these columns a little bit smaller again so they look a bit more normal. Let's have a look to see what we have. Here we're checking a value. Alright, so we're only performing this on the active cell, so if we do it on one cell at a time it's fine. Once again we're checking the value of the cell, and we say, rather than saying if and then nest one if inside the other, we do select case, And what do we select? The value of the active cell. And what do we check? In the case that the value is less than 0, make the font color red. If it's exactly 0, make it blue. If it's greater than 0, make it magenta. And then end. So this checks a number of cases. So here we are. Let's say we put here a positive number, a 0, and a negative number. And we're going to apply this on one cell at a time. So we go to 8, we run it, and it's magenta. We go to the 0, we run it, and it goes blue. And we go to the -5, we run it, and it goes red. Obviously, again, this is a trivial example, but we will see a much fuller and worked out example when we look at our function later on, towards the end of this topic. Here is another construct using case. Okay, so what we do here, this is actually a function, right? So we use something similar. Rather than using colors, we use actually text to describe something. Let me once again highlight my area and clear everything. So this time, the first thing we do is we have an if statement, right, which encloses the entire case statement. So the if statement says what? If, first of all, this is a function rather than a subroutine. Okay, so we're going to type in a function called a number sign. So the num sign function requires a variable, and the variable is a number. So if our number is numeric, then do all of that. If it isn't numeric, there is an else statement that closes it and says that the number sign, the value of it, just say this is text. Then end the if statement. What happens if the value is numeric? Then we have a number of cases. If the value of our cell is less than 0, then the result of the num sign function is the text negative. If it's 0, we say 0. If it's positive, we say positive. So what do we do with that now? We put a number of several numbers here. So we say 9, 25, -3, 7, -15, 0, I don't know, 76, anything like that. Now this, remember, is a function. So we're not going to run a subroutine. We're just going to type equals, start typing your function, num, there it is, found it out, num sign. Double click on it, and then you simply need to provide a variable. So you can type a number inside it, or as we know, of course, you put a cell address. So we click on that first cell address, we close the brackets, we place return. The result, as we expected, is positive. And simply drag it down. So you see positive, positive, negative, positive, 0. And then I'm going to put a bit further down the number, I don't know, F1, for example. Now we know F1 is not a number, okay? It is a piece of text, it's a text string. And then if I copy this formula down here, you see this is what it returns. This is text. So here, in all these cases, it runs this bit, which is checking whether it is positive, negative, or 0, right? Before it does this, it checks whether it is a number, a numerical value. Okay, so in this case, it is not a numerical value. So what the function returns is that string, saying this is text, which is what you get here. Another function, which is a little bit of a fun one, so, and hopefully it should work. This is a subroutine that it is actually a part of the application here being Excel. I'm not entirely sure whether it is going to work because it is coming through a VPN connection to a Windows machine, but we'll try to get the application, to get Excel to do some speech and speak whatever it is that we have in here. And let's try that now.
Oh, bugger.
I hope that that was recorded and you heard it. In the same way, you can, for example, put a prompt at the end of a subroutine to get Excel to speak that I have now finished the subroutine, something like that.